feel like what better time for a video review than immediately following the car wash. So this is the LuFi XF Revolution multifunction gauge. I will try to be brief. It has a lot of stuff to cover, so I'll touch on the fact that this page right here is 9 indicators of information that you can customize accordingly. I've got right now, because we're working on a couple things that are intake, MAF, and bypass valve related. I've got speed, air fuel ratio, vacuum / boost pressure coming from the manifold, the long-term trim, the RPMs, the short-term trim, throttle position, intake air temperature, and airflow grams per second coming from the MAF. All of this is extremely important in making sure that air is properly flowing through the new intake, and of course trying to identify any issues that we're having with any of the sensors on the vehicle. This car, I am driving a Subaru Legacy XT. This car does not have any tuning options available to it, although it does share the same engine as the 22 WRX, the Outback XT, the Ascent, and so on and so forth. But what's cool about this gauge is I get some insight that is not available through, an access port or other equipment that would require tuning or need to be released for me to be able to use on this car. So for a $120 piece of equipment, I've found this extremely helpful. This is just one of the pages, of course, and all of these individual icons are customizable, but this is another page that I use depending on the application, if I'm on the track or anything like that. Another one here, you see the Subaru logo. This is all customizable. You can load that information. All the metrics that you see listed, or readings, measurements that you see listed, are customizable. The RPMs and how high or low they go, as well as you'll see a little yellow indicator right before the red range. That's customizable to say, hey, this is a proper shift point, where you feel as though you want your car to shift more frequently. On a car that doesn't have like an RPM limiter like this one, where the transmission will just automatically try to throw you into the next gear and you lose all your momentum, it's nice to know before that happens. So you'll see the buttons or indicators down across the bottom are also sequential, and that's been programmed. And this is a shift light indicator, which doesn't come directly out of the box. It's like a $7 add-on when you purchase it, and for someone that needs a visual cue of when to shift, I would say it's well worth the $7 and easily programmable. In addition to that, if there is an issue with a number, this shift light, instead of flashing, will glow to say, hey, there's an issue, and then on the screen itself of the number that is the question, it will specifically let you know by turning it red that is the number that is an issue. So I'll keep going through these. This is the one that I use most frequently. As you'll see, it's extremely responsive. The inner circle is the boost reading, and the outer circle is the RPMs. Again, that's customizable. The center icon, customizable. Exhaust temperature coming from the O2 sensor. Manifold pressure, intake air temperature. And then, did I go through them all? Yeah. So back to this. What's cool about this is being able to go directly into the display, select which one you want, and cycle through a ton of different options. These user ones up at the top, they're all for custom PIDs, and if anyone, is working on that kind of stuff where, you're trying to dial in what your CVT oil temperature is, for example, and you have someone that's developing the PIDs or knows the parameters for what you're looking for, all that information can be customized and input. LuFi does have Chinese support as well as Australian support. And both of the engineers have actually been trying to work with me to give the correct parameters for CVT readings. This vehicle, however, is not playing nice. Whereas other vehicles that have CVT readings coming directly from the OBD2 port will be displayed in a different section without having to custom program it. So the CVT that would be reading out if it was on a different vehicle. Outdoor temperature, and I'm just going to keep going, but like I said, there's a variety of different things you can put in here. Fuel level, I'll just read out a couple of them as I see them. Fuel consumption, ignition timing, O2 sensor voltage readings to make sure they're not fried, trims, engine load, acceleration percentage, which is basically your pedal position, or throttle position, I would say. Intake air, this is a cool, noteworthy one. This is the temperature coming in at the manifold. And why that's important is if you have an intercooler or an upgraded intercooler, you can see the difference between the temperature coming into the intake as well as the temperature once it goes through the intercooler into the manifold. So for this car, I did have an upgraded intercooler put on it, and I can see the differences in both the pre and post temperature, but I can see the differences from factory as well, which is really, really cool. And I'll keep going. Grams per second, fuel rail pressure. The gear is customizable, but I mean, if you're driving a stick shift, that's one thing. If you're driving a CVT, it's not necessarily fun to mess around with this. Exhaust temperature, but let me get back to oil and water temperature. Get back to where it was and go for a drive. Like I said, I'll try to keep this brief, but just so you can see it moving and calculating pretty much everything all at once. It is pretty impressive. The only other thing that I did to, I guess, manipulate it, it comes with obviously the cord that plugs into your OBD2 port, but there is a separate wire that allows you to pin it to the ignition, so that the car doesn't anticipate an additional load when you're going to start up. Cars this day and age, they have a ton of different checkpoints when you go to start the vehicle. This car, for example, before I programmed the delay into this gauge, every time I started the car and the gauge started at the same time, it would throw on my Subaru SOS, just because there was a voltage concern at the time of startup. So I bypassed that by just setting a delay on the gauge itself. It starts after like 7 or 10 seconds from following the ignition of the car, which is pretty cool. It's just, you see it count and then it comes on and there's literally no issues whatsoever. So I tucked the wiring back behind the dash. It's not visible by any means, except for this that you see here and the separate wire that you see for the shift light. The thing that I didn't like about the mount was that it sticks to the car, like sticks to the dash. So I ended up getting just like a third party, like an aftermarket suction cup mount. None of the adapters that came with it fit perfectly. So I did kind of put a little bit of adhesive onto it for it to mount. It's been solid so far. It hasn't fallen off while driving or anything like that. But then I will make it a little bit more permanent of a mount with some more high quality adhesive behind it, and it'll stay there pretty much forever. Again, never fallen off, but I'm sure my luck will run out at some point. I will try to get, as long as I have enough space, I'll try to get get you an idea of the shift indicators. The sequential lights that'll stagger across the bottom, I did customize them to come from the out in as a stage up, and then the shift light itself will hit at the parameters that I set for RPMs. The trim values are really helpful as we're trying to diagnose stuff that's either going on with the mass airflow sensor or with the new intake that's been put on there. But I will stop talking and drive a little bit more. see the intake air temperature dropping as I pull on it, just because we do have a heat shield in there, and it does a really, really good job of blocking out a lot of the hot air. Especially as I'm moving, it's pulling in through the air through the scoop. And then the grams per second is great to see it calculating the flow of air that's coming in through the intake. One other thing I'll touch on while I'm sitting is it does have a time attack mode, and you do have the ability to view your codes, clear your codes, and so on and so forth. The time attack mode does have 0 to 60. It has 0 to 100 and quarter mile. And they just get queued up right there when you need them. And then I'll go back to this one so you can see one of the gauges in real time. Right now on this one I have exhaust temperature. The PSI is in the inner circle, as well as the numeric value of it, so I can see the comparison. And then this is the manifold air temperature, so it's the temp after the air passes through my intercooler. So again, it has been really cool to see the difference between those two, following a couple of the upgrades, and seeing the difference from stock to aftermarket has been really cool too. So if you're, a car enthusiast, you want to see what your car is doing behind the scenes, for $120 for a gauge like this, I mean, it'll definitely serve every purpose you're kind of looking for. Now, obviously, there's going to be limitations based on your car's OBD2, but based on your car's ECU, I should say. If the values are not specifically available, then you're going to need custom PIDs for them to be visible. Again, the only one that I haven't been able to see on this car was my CVT, and the temperature inherently of the oil in there. But again, this car does have a fluid exchanger, so it's not necessarily going to be off one or the other, too high or too low. But let's see. This gauge has been helpful in diagnosing a boost leak as well. The person that I've been working with on this was able to notice, based on my loads of pulling here and there, that it looked like the car was trying to calculate for a boost leak. And you could see the trim values going all over the place because of it. And we were able to find part of the leak, of course, and kind of go from there. But without the insight, without a tool, without something to be able to see, what the ECU is trying to accomplish at that moment in time, it's just all speculation, and it doesn't really give you a point of reference. So for just that alone, I've been happy with it. Let's see. Try to get that shift light one more time. This back over here. that about covers it. Again, so much that it's capable of. It can do as much or as little as you need it to. So there is a newer version of it. It's the XS. I did snag an XS for another vehicle just because I want to see how the two compare. But realistically, I prefer this one. And if you're someone that needs that cue of the independent shift light, then you would prefer this one too. But that's pretty much it. Hopefully this helps someone in your decision-making process.